Welcome into this week's edition of the State of Recruiting podcast. I know you're not usually used to hearing my voice, but I'm Horns 24/7 managing editor Taylor Estes, standing in this week for Horns 24/7 recruiting analyst Mike Roach, who is celebrating his wedding anniversary. So happy anniversary to Mike and his bride. But we have a loaded edition of the State of Recruiting this week as Texas prepares to enter another major recruiting weekend. Before we get to all those details, I want to introduce our co-host, Horns 24/7 recruiting analyst Hudson Standish. Hudson, I'm going to rely on you a lot today to, kind of pull us along with this recruiting information. But how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much for filling in as the host. Definitely couldn't do it without you. And yeah, I'm excited. It's a loaded recruiting weekend, fresh off of kind of an Arch Madness close of the month.
Yeah, no doubt about it. I mean, we earlier this week, I talked to Steve Sarkisian coming out of practice on Tuesday. And, obviously he can't talk about recruits by name, but he was asked about, what last weekend was with Arch Manning, obviously headlining the big recruiting weekend with Texas Relays going on too. But he did point to this also being a major recruiting weekend without going into too many details. So we're going to get into the details today, Hudson. I think that, I think the main thing that I think a lot of Texas fans probably want to hear about right now is Samaje Burrell canceling his Ohio State visit that he had initially planned this weekend. He's supposed to be at Texas. What could you tell us about the four-star Crowley linebacker and what the latest is with his recruitment?
Yeah, that was a big development today. On Thursday, when Mike and I got the text that Samaje would actually be canceling his Ohio State visit and heading up to Austin, I mean, it just made us feel a lot better about our crystal ball predictions that we put in for him. He is one of the better inside linebackers in a state that normally, even though Texas is the best state in the country when it comes to producing blue chip football talent, inside linebacker is a position that doesn't stack up to a lot of other states. So when you have a guy like Samaje Burrell in state, you do have to prioritize him, and that's exactly what Steve Sarkisian, Pete Kwiatkowski, and Jeff Choate have done. So getting him to cancel an Ohio State unofficial and head to Austin after Mike and I, felt good enough to put in the first predictions for him in the industry earlier this week, it's a really good sign. And the things that we keep hearing on Samaje are trending extremely positive for Texas.
Would you say right now, before we get into the visit weekend, just with, looking at, I know Texas only has 2 commitments in the 2023, recruiting class right now, but they're all on the defensive side of the ball. How would you kind of rate where the coaches are in their recruiting pitches? And, is this kind of a sign of the focus of where they're trying to go in 2023?
Yeah, Taylor, it's a really good point, and it's something that Mike and I actually spoke about earlier today on the phone as a potential article coming up, because so much of the offensive recruiting is kind of tied up in Arch Manning's recruitment, that until he makes a decision or until there is more clarity at what they're doing at the quarterback position, it's not going to be stagnant, but it's going to be in a little bit of a holding pattern, sans the offensive line and maybe tight end recruiting. But on the defensive side of the ball, it really has been all systems go for the Texas coaching staff. I mean, you have a safety or corner committed in Jamel Johnson, who was the first piece. You added Dylan Spencer from Houston C.E. King as kind of a little bit of a tweener between an edge and a 5 technique, even though I think that he'll grow to be a 5 technique at the college level. And then if you do have the ability to add somebody like a Samaje Burrell or a Darian Villette or Anthony Hill to the second level, then you're starting to stack pieces across all 3 levels of the defense in a really productive way, especially considering that, while the offensive recruiting kind of surged when Sark got hired and there were questions about the defense, now you are seeing a little bit of a flip to that in the 23 cycle. It's really, really intriguing to follow.
Yeah, no doubt about it. And I think anybody that watched Texas football last year knows that more playmakers on defense, the better. and
That's exactly right.
Yeah. So, all right. So we'll kind of put that on the side table here, but let's get into this big recruiting weekend. Let's start with the offensive side of the ball, Hudson. Obviously, 5-star running back Reuben Owens is probably the headliner of this visit weekend. He was supposed to come last weekend, right? And then there was a hiccup with that.
Exactly. And there was a little bit of a, I think, scheduling issue there, but there was no doubt that he was going to get back to Austin before the offseason was over. So it was no surprise when we saw that he was quickly scheduled to make another appearance. And I think also, too, Ruben kind of heard through the grapevine about the good time that Jonte and his good friend Arch Manning also had on the visit. So there was a little bit, I wouldn't say FOMO, but there was a little bit of like, okay, I actually do need to get back to Austin maybe a little quicker than I thought. So he's a big headliner. Other than him, Mike coined the core four of the Texas 2023 recruiting class being Arch Manning, Reuben Owens, Jonte Cook, and Anthony Hill. We'll get to Anthony Hill, who's also scheduled to visit a little bit later on the defensive breakdown. But Jonte Cook is making a return trip to Austin, which is a really, really good indicator for his recruitment after Texas kind of nailed it on a more laid-back, low-key visit pitch to him when he was up in Austin for Texas Relays. So that was an extremely encouraging development.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I feel like in hearing what you and Mike have reported and then hearing you guys talk on the State of Recruiting podcast, it sounds like the low key type of like visit pitch was kind of catered around Arch Manning because he's a little bit more of a low key type of guy. Honestly, in hearing about him and then talking to Riley Dodge, Quinn Ewers, former high school coach, it sounds like they're kind of these like mythological creatures that really just don't care about anything except for football and just kind of like being like laid back. And obviously it sounded like that was going to be like suited more for Arch Manning when you guys were talking about how last weekend went with Jonte Cook. Is that more of his style, or is this going to be a totally different vibe? Do you think, entering this week with maybe Texas throwing all the type of stunts and all of the flash that they have to offer, at these recruits?
I think it's going to be a little bit of best of both worlds where Jonte Cook, if you just follow him from social media and you don't really, if you don't have the ability to talk to him in person, you might think that it's just the flash and it's the, recruit photo shoots and all of the, NIL pitches and stuff. But the Texas staff did such a good job last week making sure that, okay, it's football focused, it's sports focused, and it's laid back. But now when he comes back this time, you can kind of hit on those other, visit elements that most recruits liked with Jonte and kind of give him a Texas can be the best of both worlds situation, which when Texas is firing on all cylinders recruiting, that's what it is. It's a best of both worlds. You can have the football, you can have the off the field stuff that Austin has to offer. Whereas a lot of other places, you kind of only get one or the other. You kind of pick and choose between this is the best football fit. This is a great, college lifestyle. So Texas's staff being able to showcase the ability to kind of do both is really major. And also quickly on the offensive side of the ball too, Texas hosted Arch's teammate and tight end offer Will Randall last week. They're then hosting Arlington St. Houston tight end Lafayette KOA, who Mike and I both have crystal ball predictions in for Texas. We know that his decision timeline will be August, and it's looking like it's kind of a Texas-North Carolina battle with schools like Auburn and Florida trying to get into the mix. That's a major recruitment that you should be following this weekend, along with Colleen Harker Heights offensive lineman Jaden Chapman, who is one of the best offensive linemen on the Texas board and will be making a back-to-back visit. He raved about Texas offensive line coach Kyle Flood's ability to kind of keep it real at practice, I'd say, and then post-practice getting to hang out with a lot of the guys on the team. So those two are some additional offensive recruits to watch this weekend.
All right, so I'm looking at the list that you guys have over at Horns 24/7, and there are 3 maybes on the offensive side of the ball. And Jalen Brown, the wide receiver from Miami Gulliver Prep, he's listed as a maybe. I'm probably going to butcher this one, but is it Jaquays Headaway? Am I butchering that one?
It's not a butchering at all. I've heard it both ways as Yaquez or Jaquez.
Okay, so wide receiver Langham Creek, he's listed as a maybe. a maybe, and then Jaden Greathouse is listed as a maybe. Is there any more indication of if any of those three are going to come or go this week?
So we didn't get a ton of clarification on Greathouse. We believe he'll be there, but we did get clarification today. And as you know, Taylor, with Mike on vacation and me having internet issues slash backyard flooding issues, it's been a little bit of a hectic day. But Andrew Ivins,
Right?
exactly. But Andrew Ivins confirmed that Jaylen Brown will be getting to Austin this weekend, which is just massive to host, a 5-star caliber wide receiver of that ilk. That is massive. Ivins also mentioned that he does feel like Miami is the leader there, but it's kind of what you say in recruiting. You get him on campus and then you figure it out later. Get him on campus, make an impression, try to make it tough for him, even though he is a Miami-based kid. And then with Yaquez Petaway, that one, I do believe that he's coming. He said that he'd be in Austin, but he's kind of a tricky one when it comes to visits, just because he's one of the rare recruits that kind of has to work a second job, work to help provide in addition to kind of treating recruiting and, skill development as a job. So I'm always a little bit tentative with Yaquez just because I know that he has a lot on his plate other than the recruiting aspect, which, as Mike and I kind of mentioned, is something that he and Texas wide receiver coach Brennan Marion have bonded over, because their growing up experiences have been pretty identical when it comes to having to support your family and kind of, have that extra added sense of responsibility on your plate at that young of an age, while you're also trying to compete and grind against some of the best receivers in the country. So we believe that Jaylen Brown and Yaquez Petaway will be there. Jaden Greathouse, also, it's such a short trip for him. It's kind of, maybe if he wakes up and decides that it's worth heading from Westlake Hills to the 40 acres.
Yeah, that's not too long of a trip. And that's a good point, talking about Brennan Marion. For any listeners that don't know, there was one point that he was essentially homeless, in JUCO before he made it to the Division I ranks, and obviously now a wide receivers coach and passing game coordinator at Texas. So it's always easy to root for those guys, Hudson, at least in my experience.
Yeah, absolutely, Taylor. And I think it's something that a lot of people in the media have kind of really kind of drawn themselves to Yaquez Petaway because of that too. The fact that he's been so productive on the track and on the football field, in addition to, working and just trying to get this extra skill development into, he's a guy that a lot of people, national analysts at 247, in addition to Mike and I, we think that he has the mental makeup to really succeed in college because of the experiences that he's already had at such a young age.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. All right, let's flip over to the defensive side of the ball. Obviously, I think Javian Toviano, 5-star 24/7 Sports composite cornerback, is kind of the headliner of the group that's expected to come in this weekend. Hudson, aside from him and, touch on him obviously, but who are some other guys to kind of watch with this visit weekend?
I think Mike put it really well, which inspired a later piece of mine of the top 5 recruits that Texas can make up ground with on a visit weekend. When Texas hosted Javian Toviano, kind of as a later kind of surprise addition to Junior Day, it was thought of as he's giving Texas another shot to get back in it. Let's see what they do. And they absolutely seized the opportunity and got right back in the thick of his recruitment. So getting him back on campus again, maybe this is a spot to where Texas can take the lead outright, or maybe even extend the lead if that's where he's leaning right now. So that is a absolutely major development. I think maybe even a bigger one, if not tied, is Denton Ryan linebacker Anthony Hill, who's also a 247 composite 5-star. There's a chance that this will be his the first of 2 visits. He's also considering going to Texas for the spring game. He told Mike and I this weekend that it was either he's going to go to Texas's spring game or Oklahoma's spring game. So potentially having a good enough visit to where he decides to go to the spring game for Texas, that would be major. There's guys all over the place. We touched on Samaje Burrell, Darian Gillette, the Marlin linebacker, showed up on campus. Bravion Rogers, the LaGrange 5-star corner, will probably be there. A guy that's flying under the radar that Mike and I have talked about a ton is Friendswood's Braylon Shelby. That's a guy, Taylor, too. When you talk to recruits, you can kind of gauge how strongly staffs are pushing for them based on frequency of contact. So Braylon's always been a guy that I've been close with since I started in the industry. And about 4 weeks ago, I hit him up and was just like, hey, what's the contact level like with Texas? And he's like, well, I talk to Coach Sarkisian every single day. I talk to Coach Kwiatkowski every single day. And then I think 4 support staffers will text me, hook them, and that they want to see me in burnt orange every single day. So when you get messages like that, it's pretty clear to see who's a priority. And with other kids, if it's, oh yeah, I hear from this coach, once every week, it's also easy to put that together. So that's a guy that I think most fans might not realize is as big of a priority as the Texas staff views him in the speed edge role. So that's another one to keep an eye out on. New Texas commit Dylan Spencer will be making the trip up to Austin. That's a very exciting one. I mean, it's just loaded on the defensive side of the ball. I think that what the Texas visit may lack as far as Arch Madness star power, they gain in just 5 stars on basically every level of the defense coming to visit.
Yeah, and when you're talking about the coaching staff, that level of communication with somebody like how you had said about Braylon Shelby. That's how you pronounce it, right?
Mm.
I'm terrible with names, Hudson. You'll soon learn this. I can't believe I know how to pronounce your name, honestly. But yeah, I mean that is it's very a lot of times you want to read the tea leaves in recruiting, and this is like it's not even tea leaves. It's basically on
Exactly.
board,
Exactly.
Yeah. All right, so we're going to take a really quick break here, but stick around because we are going to return with some of the key points that Texas wants to hit home this weekend and what will be considered a successful recruiting weekend with the Longhorns prospects that are on campus. So stay tuned. We will be right back. And if you're watching us on the Horns 24/7 YouTube channel, we will continue rolling on here. Hudson, we talked, at length about the prospects on the offensive side, the defensive side of the ball that are coming in. Obviously, a ton of star power coming on the 40 acres this weekend. In your opinion, what would constitute as a successful recruiting weekend for Steve Sarkisian and his staff?
So I think last weekend, Mike and I went into the visit weekend thinking, okay, just stay ahead with Arch, use his momentum to kind of score points across the board for all these different recruits, and just kind of stay ahead. I think that they surpassed that goal pretty significantly with all of the reports that Mike and I were hearing. So a little bit, I'd say, going up on the grading curve. I think you get a commitment out of the weekend, and we start hearing reports of guys who maybe had Texas third behind Oklahoma and A&M, or Texas is maybe the second team. The visit is good enough to where those type of recruits are saying, okay, Texas is my leader right now heading into official visit season. I think that's the main thing as far as grading for success is, can you get 5 to 8 guys heading into official visit season with Texas as their de facto leader, even if they won't say it in interviews or if they are, not very public about it. I think that is what I define success at. Over under on commitments at 0.5, nail that, and then make up enough ground with a lot of the elites or extend leads to the point to where Mike and I feel like it could be a burnt orange wave over the summer.
Yeah, that makes sense. So remind the listeners here, when do the official visits kind of start? And of the guys that are coming in this weekend, do you know if any of them ones to watch have like set in stone official visits to Texas?
Most recruits are going to set their official visits during the summer because the vast majority of recruits want to have their decision in place before their senior year of football starts. A decent amount already know that they're going to take fall official visits, like somebody like David Hicks, who's not expected on campus but is the #1 player in the state. He is a guy that knows, okay, I'm committing at the Under Armour All-American game in Orlando, so I'm going to take fall official visits. Technically, I believe you could start official visits as soon as this weekend, but it's a little bit early, so Texas is going to be kind of strategic in how they use that. So this is kind of the last big unofficial visit weekend. I'd say that officials will start late April to May, but ideally, you kind of want to have that last official. So I bet the majority of Texas official visits will be June, July.
Okay, that's good to know. Yeah, because the last to sell usually gets a lot more to remind the prospects of. And I always think back to even when Charlie Strong was the head coach at Texas, they always went towards the last official visit weekend. And then also when the coaches went in home, it was like, don't let Charlie sit on your couch
Yeah.
because your kid's going to be a Texas commit by the time that they're done. And he was successful in pulling a lot of the Florida guys to Texas. Texas obviously has some Florida prospects potentially coming this weekend. Going to be interesting to watch. Hudson, any final thoughts leading into the second visit weekend? And are you buying the Arch Madness hype? Are you thinking Texas is heat check there? Where do you think Texas is with Arch Manning?
So I think Mike phrased it pretty well and also delicately because you want to be a little bit delicate with the
Oh, of
arch
course.
recruitment, but he's the way he put it that I liked was the kind of small, like the quiet confidence that Texas coaches, sources, recruits had about Arch after the visit last weekend. It was just straight up like a little bit louder confidence and a little bit of a almost chest pounding if you say so. So I think that right now, Texas, you would no other school like Texas wouldn't trade their position for the field or any other school, in my opinion. It's going to be really interesting to see Arch's next visits. I bet there will be good news coming out of the Alabama visit to where maybe they're not as out of it as people were thinking. But if Georgia nails their official visit, I'll be a little bit more concerned. But right now, I think Texas fans should feel great about where it stacks up with Arch Manning.
That's why you listen to the State of Recruiting podcast, ladies and gentlemen, because always get the best scoop. And in saying that, if you did not listen to our special edition of the State of Recruiting podcast, which was released, I believe, Sunday night, definitely go back
Mhm.
there. It had all of the intel coming out of Arch Manning's visit weekend last weekend. Obviously, another major visit weekend this weekend for Texas. So you'll want to stick around at Horns 24/7. Tune into the Stampede, obviously, that drops every Monday, and the State of Recruiting, which typically drops every single Friday. So for Hudson Standish, I am Taylor Estes. Sitting in for Mike Roach. Happy anniversary, Mike Roach. We hope that you and your bride have an amazing time together. But until next time, make sure you go over to Horns 24/7 for all of the latest Texas recruiting scoop. We'll talk to y'all later.